Hello, all of you Writing Gals followers. I am going to start my week of videos with how to plan romance for pantsers. A lot of people are asking questions about how to plot a romance, and I am a pantser, and I saw that a lot of you were too. But I think even if you're not a pantser, there will be some valuable information in here. It's really just about how much work you want to do going into the story, which is why I'm calling this planning instead of plotting. I don't plot very much because I like to let the characters tell me how the story's gonna go, and a lot of times things they say or decisions they make can change the direction of things. So I like to just have a lot of really basic guidelines that I want to hit to keep my story going in the right direction. And also that will inform my decisions going on, because if I know certain things going into the story, then it does help me to be more creative, and it helps me to focus my creativity. So let's get that story going in the right direction. First, you need to decide what your story is going to be about, and that seems like kind of a, obvious question, but I think that you need to have a really firm idea in your mind of the kind of romance that you're going to tell, because there are so many different kinds, so many different angles that you can take it, and if you just start with absolutely no idea, then you're going to ramble and you're not going to be able to write a good first draft. That's always one of my goals, is to write the best first draft I can. I know a lot of people say that the first draft should be awful or can be awful and it doesn't matter, and it's all true. But for me, writing to market and trying to release rapidly, I don't want to spend a lot of time rewriting my stories. So I try to start from the very beginning, making sure that it's what I want it to be. The most important thing here is tropes. We talk a lot about tropes on the Writing Gals podcast, and a lot of you may be completely new to the concept of what it is. So I do recommend that you go on and watch our podcasts on YouTube, and specifically look for the episodes where we talk about tropes. We teach you how to find them, how to see what's happening in your market, in your niche, and how to brand them, and all kinds of really good information about tropes. But for a basic list, use Victorine's trope list that you can find in the file section on our Facebook group. She goes into so much detail there about how to use each of the different kinds of tropes to both add interest, add conflict, add depth. I mean, there's so much you can do with it, but tropes are building blocks, and that's what's important to remember, that they are the things that readers and you can use to tell other people what your story is about. But they're basically like a whole bunch of Legos, and you're going to choose what colors and what pieces and what sizes and shapes you're going to put together to create what you're aiming towards. So I'm going to just give you a few examples. I'm actually plotting a story this morning that I'm going to start writing as soon as I finish this video. So first thing I like to do is actually go to the list of tropes and look them over, and I will have a general idea based on, characters or the kind of story I'm writing or what kind of series I'm working on as to, a general idea of what I'm going through. But the tropes, once I go through and read each one of them, I will be able to nail down exactly what it is that I'm shooting for, and I will usually find several other tropes that I hadn't considered that I can add into my story that will make it better. I am currently writing a young adult series, and this is the third book in my series. So in this book, I'm using the trope all grown up because they have been friends, since they were very young. So they know a lot about each other, they're very close, and, that can be both a good and bad thing. I'm going to have a bet involved between my female main character and one of her friends that is going to propel her and motivate her to do things outside of her comfort zone, and it's also going to cause a little bit of conflict later down the road. They are going to be friends to lovers, which kind of works well with the all grown up trope. The all grown up trope, they could also be enemies. I mean, they don't have to be friends just because, you know, they know each other. In my case, for this book, it's going to be friends to lovers. There is going to be a matchmaker, but I'm going to twist it. Instead of the matchmaker making things happen or making it easier, the matchmaker is actually going to make the romance harder to come together. There's going to be some unrequited love because one of the two characters is going to like the other one, and the other one is going to be oblivious. And I'm going to use opposites attract, again with a twist. Usually this means that they're completely different people, so there's no way they could ever get together. And I'm going to play with that and actually make them very much alike, but have the female character think that because they are alike, there's no way they can be together. So she tries to be the exact opposite of what she has always been. And I'm just going to play with that and see what that does for my story. Okay, so you go through and you figure out a list of your tropes, and you can figure out exactly how those tropes are going to bring your characters together and also how they're going to keep them apart. It's just really good information to... Okay, so your characters are going to want something, and you need to figure out what it is, because that is what will give them motivation to go through the conflict of the story. If they don't want something really badly, then when things get hard, they're going to be inclined to just quit and give up. So make the goal or the desire that they have really, really matter to them. Giving them a story goal or something they want will help readers connect and root for them, because people want to see people trying hard for things, and they want to see them caring about something. And so that's another valuable reason to put it in there. And it's also the only way to have a happy ending. If the characters don't achieve something, if they're not victorious, then it's not going to be a happy ending. In romance, you can give them wants and goals that will put them at odds with the other main character, and that adds to the depth of the conflict, because the story goals, the character goals should be personal. It should be something that they want for themselves. And so if their goals are in direct conflict with the romance, the love interest goals and conflicts, then you have a great opportunity for conflict right then. But it also makes it to where their goal isn't easy to achieve, because there's going to be this romance that they're also going to want, and so it's going to put their romance and their story goals directly as foes to each other. And it is possible that what they want can be the other character in the story, but you have to have a very, very good reason why they can't have them. And so I'm kind of playing around this with my young adult that I'm wanting, since the male character knows that he has a crush on the girl character. That's his goal is to overcome her friend zoning him, if that makes sense, so that he can have a chance with her. So the friend zone is a conflict and an obstacle for him. But there's also, I'm going to have to put a lot more in there that's going to keep them apart, because that's not quite enough. That's something that the first time they have any kind of a physically intimate or attractive moment between each other, it could be overcome. And so I'm still working on that. I need to come up with another conflict, and that's where my bet is going to come into play. I'm just not exactly sure how yet, because I'm a pantser and I don't know all the answers yet. But I do know that that's something I can use as a tool later on to keep them apart. So we're going to talk more about putting obstacles in their way. Remember your tropes, go back to what they were. Like I said, my bet trope that I'm using is a very good one to use as an obstacle, because it can be something that results in hurt feelings. For my character, she's very competitive, so she's going to want to win her bet, and the bet is which of her and her friend can have their first kiss with somebody, like who gets to kiss someone first, and it has to be a stranger. So her bet is going to lead her towards being competitive and trying to kiss somebody besides my love interest. So hopefully that will work out. So you have to think of something good when you're coming up with obstacles. It can't just be miscommunications or the characters being stupid, because readers hate that. So really think of obstacles that will work for you. It could be something like they have completely different political ideas, and they're, could never agree with or trust the other person. It could be that one of them is the other's boss, so there's a conflict of interest. Or it could be something where one is already committed to somebody else. I used that in my last book, Saved by the Prince, where he was a royal head of state and had an obligation to have a politically arranged marriage. And so he was already set up to be with somebody else. So it was something that they both had a really hard time overcoming, even though they fell in love. You have to set up the obstacle at the beginning and build it as the story goes on, or it seems artificial. So if the reader doesn't see what the obstacle is in the beginning of the story, and then they start to fall in love, and then all of a sudden, oh, we can't be together because of this, then the reader, it just seems like the author is just, it's sort of like Deus Ex Machina. It's the author coming in and forcing things to happen without preparing the reader for it. So you need to foreshadow it. You need to make the conflict be a constant thing that that the character is recognizing, and also that they are already struggling with and fighting against at the beginning at some level, even if they haven't completely accepted it, within their own mind. Propinquity. So putting your characters together is important. You have to be able to repel them with their conflict, and then you also have to push them back together again, because most of the time your conflict is going to be something that is going to make your character say, okay, well, I'm going to avoid that person. This is hard, this is painful, this is something I can't have. Whatever it is, it's going to push them apart. And so you have to have something to put them back together so that they have time to get to know each other, to have their attraction and their feelings for each other grow, and also so that they can reveal those intimate details of their lives and their personality, all those little details that help someone to get to know another person. Those all have to happen, and they can only happen if they are in the same place. Victorine calls this Velcro, so it sticks them together, even if they don't want to be together. This really depends a lot on your story. So in the one that I'm currently working on, like I mentioned, they are next door neighbors. So they're going to be around each other a lot. They're also friends, so they're going to be part of each other's world, and they're going to see each other a lot. But that wasn't quite enough for me, because something has to change. There always needs to be an inciting incident in a story, and in a romance, whatever that is, the inciting incident is what moves your character from where they were in their lives, where they were headed, onto a different path, onto a different direction that's going to lead them down the story road. And so my characters being next door neighbors wasn't going to work as well, because they already knew each other. It works better if, say, someone moves in next door and it's like this whole new, brand new dynamic. But for me, it needed a new dynamic. And so I'm going to have her ask him to help her become more feminine, because she's kind of a jock character. She has always been around boys, and she doesn't know how to be alluring and flirtatious and all these sort of things. So she's going to ask him to do this favor for her that is going to put them in a much closer dynamic than they have been before, where there's going to be more touching, more one-on-one time, and in a different sort of atmosphere than they've ever been in before. So it's going to challenge and push and change their relationship. But again, by putting them together. Okay, it's a romance, so you're going to want there to be a happily ever after ending. In some romances, it can be happily for now, where you just leave it where they're, together, but you don't necessarily say, oh, they're married and live happily ever after. But I'm going to say most romance readers want to feel like it's going to be a forever ending. So you can get away with happily forever after. Happily for now more in young adult series or in any series where it's just a romance plot woven through. But I would say, especially in historical, it needs to be happily ever after. And in contemporary, I strongly suggest that you do happily ever after, just because more readers will be happy with that. Yes, the reader knows that they're going to end up together because it's romance, and they'll hate you if you don't put them together. So it's kind of like a spoiler alert before the book ever ends, right? Except it's not. That's the thing that most people don't understand about romance, is even though everybody knows where the story is going, and they know that, these two characters are going to be falling in love, it's all about how you do it. It's all about the experience. It's all about giving them something fresh that's the exact thing that they came looking for. I love this quote: give the reader what they want in a way they don't see coming. So Dan Brown is more of a crime and mystery fiction writer. I know a lot of you probably know who he is. But this applies so much to romance, because we are trying to give them what they want. And so you have to figure out, okay, how can I twist this? How can I add some element, some surprising thing that makes it new and exciting to them and delivers all of that dopamine and that rush of endorphins and feelings that they came looking for when they picked up your book. For Pantsers, the ending just seems like this far distant hazy object that we know we need to get to, and we don't really know what it is. We have this vague idea. And so sometimes even thinking about that ending can stress you out, and you just kind of have to say, okay, well, I'll figure it out when I get there. And that's fine. Like, I just want to dispel the idea that you have to know the ending at the beginning right now, because you don't. Trust your gut. As you're writing the story, I promise your brain will be figuring it out, and when you get to writing the end, you can do it. It will happen. It will just be there. And if you need to figure out where you're going to end it, I always kind of take a step back once I get to the last few chapters of the book, and I go back and I read my beginning. And a lot of times I just put the reflection of the beginning and the end. It reminds me where they were, what their goals were, what they were missing, what their character arc has been through the story. I just gather up all those threads and make sure that I've got them all sort of handy when I go in to write that chapter, so that I can answer all those questions and fulfill all those promises and complete all those arcs. And so going back and looking at the beginning right before the end really helps me to do that. But remember, you can edit. And that is where good story endings happen. And for Pantsers, editing is going to be important, because it's going to give you the opportunity to go back and fill in all those things that you didn't know while you were writing it, because we're not plotters. And so that's when you can go in and add in the foreshadowing, or take something out, or add something in to make sure that everything lines up by the end of the story. POV is always something to talk about in its beginning stages. So genre matters with POV. There are certain expectations that, the market has that readers like. In historical, it's a little bit all over the place. A long time ago, well, I would say, as recently as the 80s, you could write an omniscient I would say, in historical, but more and more it's changing to where that is completely outdated. And so I would say that in almost all romance genres, you should not write an omniscient. You should keep it firmly within the head of a character, because romance is a very intimate genre, and we need to be in their heads and feeling their feelings. And so you need to be tight in there. But you can do it from more than one point of view, like one character's point of view, two characters' point of view, that's fine, but I wouldn't do any more than that, because the story needs to be kept firmly focused on these two characters and nobody else. You can do it with just one and just have first person. That's really popular in young adult. It can be done in contemporary and historical. It can be done well in those. But generally contemporary, adult, and historical is done in a dual POV, in third person. Also, not just in first person in young adult, where you can have first person either only one character's point of view or two characters' point of view. It just gets all muddied. So I would just say, read what you're going to sort of try to drive your readers towards. Like, say, if you want readers to pick up your book because it reminds them of this other book, then you should match it to that. If you're trying to get to the top of the best-selling charts, then you should see what the books there are doing. So I've written young adult books where it has only, first person from one character's point of view, and I've written young adult books where it had first person and two characters' point of view. And that's really tricky because it's hard to keep your voices really straight when you do that. I tend to think that if you are writing adult contemporary, you should write in dual point of view in third person. We could go on and on about this. There's lots of characters. Maybe we should do a whole point of view video. But whatever you do, just make sure you do it really, really well. So we're going to talk a little bit about introducing the love interest. Make it obvious to the reader who the love interest is. When you're plotting your romance, you need to be thinking, okay, how do I make sure that the reader knows that this is the love interest? Now, point of view can really help with that, because if you have two point of view characters, they're going to know those are the two love interests. So that really helps. But if you, for any reason, only have one point of view character, then you're going to have to be really careful that you don't lead the reader astray by making them like another character. And that I've seen that happen in a lot of first chapters even, where someone describes a man in a way that makes him really appealing and attractive, but he's not the love interest. And so it's a disappointment. It's an unpleasant jolt for the reader to kind of take cues from the author that this character is important and the one that I should pay attention to, and then later discover that that was not the love interest. So just be really careful how you do that when you're setting up your opening scene. And I do think you need to introduce them early, and there's a lot of debate about how soon you need to introduce that love interest. I would say do it as quickly as possible. I always try to do it in some way at least by chapter 3. But if I can do it by chapter 1, that's when I do it. And I think I have introduced the love interest in the first chapter in the last 15 books that I've written, because that is the best way to do it, because you want your reader to be all in. You want them to say, yes, I like this love interest. I like the main characters. I want to see where they're going because I'm invested in them. And so it's something that you can do by a lot of different ways and means. It doesn't have to be an actual meeting. It doesn't have to be that character is actually there, but there should be some idea that will at least hint to the reader about who it's going to be in that first chapter. That is 100% my advice. But if you do two point of view characters and you introduce one in one chapter and the other one in the second chapter and then have them meet in the third chapter, then you can get away with having it that far away. But that is absolutely the latest that I would do it. So everybody talks about a meet cute, but a lot of new authors might not know what it is. And basically it just means how your characters are introduced to each other. And you need to make it a really fun situation for the reader. It needs to be either funny, it needs to be dynamic, it needs to be compelling, it needs to be something that is just really exciting in some way, and that sets that character's world all upside down. Because that is, the meet cute is really the inciting incident in a romance. It's what changes the direction of their lives because they met that person. So if you have a story like I'm currently writing where they have known each other for a long time, you've got to ask, okay, so how do you do a meet cute when they already know each other? And the way I would like to explain it is that it needs to be seeing that person in a new way. It needs to be seeing some new side of that person that changes everything, if that makes sense. And so there has to be, again, this is who I thought you were, and then, oh, but you're maybe this person that I didn't ever know existed. Or some dynamic in that person's life has changed that they're introduced to. So basically, look at the meet cute as the inciting incident that changes the direction of that person's lives and or their relationship. You immediately need to bring the conflict into the story. So many times I read a lot of romances where it just isn't there. The conflict isn't coming. Sometimes people meet and date and have all these lovely conversations and kiss and all this sort of stuff, and then the conflict just kind of happens like partway, like halfway through the book or something. And the problem with that is like there's nothing very interesting about that. There's nothing interesting about people falling in love easily. People don't want to read stories about that. They want to be on the edge of their seat and what's going to happen and what are they going to choose and what are they going to do, and asking all these questions. If your reader isn't asking questions and trying to figure out what's coming next because they're on the edge of their seat, then they're going to put your book down. So that conflict needs to come in really early on. So romance beats are the points that you need to hit in a story that readers expect, and it is kind of why people consider romance to be so formulaic, but it is what delivers the experience that your readers are wanting. So we're going to talk just a little bit about what those beats are, what they mean, and hopefully by the end of that you'll be able to have a really clear idea on how to kind of set up the rest of your story. So we've talked about the life before the story goal of the characters. The first chapter, in each point of view, should establish who that character is, give us a very strong idea of their personality and what they want and who they are, and also kind of what they're lacking before the love interest comes into it. Then you have the meet cute, which we just talked about. And then you have this kind of stage where they're getting to know each other, maybe in a new way, where they're just feeling each other out. If this is an enemies to lovers, then there's going to be a lot of tension, a lot of back and forth, arguing and bickering. But at the same time, they're getting to know who that person is. Then there is also in the early stages of the book, their initial attraction. Where this actually happens can move around a little bit. It can happen right at the meet cute. It can happen as they get to know each other just a little bit better. Like maybe they have some kind of interaction that gives them a reason to be attracted to them. Like maybe they meet them at the dog park and they're really nice to their dog and they're like, oh, that's attractive. Whatever it is, it needs to happen at the very, very beginning. Just some little zing of like, ooh, I like this about you. But then, as soon as that happens, the conflict needs to be right there to pull them back apart. Romance is a constant dance of bringing them together and pulling them back. And every time they move forward, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, all the way through the romance. So the next step would be the attraction that they originally felt builds to more romantic feelings. And they may not acknowledge it or accept it, but it's happening. And maybe they're becoming friends, or maybe they are learning to work with each other, or maybe they are, going through a lot of conflict with each other if it's enemies to lovers. But at the same time, you have to be showing that bottom layer where there is more building, that they are beginning to trust them, or understand them and like them. They have to like them and find themselves wanting to be in the other's company more and more often. But then again, the conflict needs to keep pulling them back. Every time they start to have an impulse to go towards someone, you have to give them another reason to step back. So eventually you get to where their feelings have amped up for each other to the point where they can't deny it to themselves anymore. And they decide to kind of test out the romantic waters a little bit. This part you can make as short or as long as you want, and it just depends on how you want the story to go. It can be something that happens in a glance between two characters, or it can be something where they actually date for a few days or a short period of time, weeks, whatever. But you have to remember that the longer you stretch that out, the more you lose your tension in the story. So I really like to keep that part very, very short, where maybe they just have one moment together where you show the reader what they could be together and what what they could be as a couple and how amazing it is. And just give them a glimpse of it. And then you need to pull it back. So you need to have that conflict built up to the highest pitch, and it needs to just rain down on them. And they need to have their black moment where everything seems impossible, or where they're just hurt really, really bad. And so both characters break apart and they go to their metaphorical corners to regroup, to figure out what they want. Okay. But they're going to have to really feel like all is lost and there's no point, and they're hurt and nothing will ever be what they had just started to hope that it would be. Then they need to work through their feelings, and they have to decide that they love the other person enough that they are willing to change who they are or what they're doing, or they have to sacrifice something that they love or want, and they have to be willing to believe the other person if trust was broken so that they can be together. That is something that both characters need to go through if you have dual character point of views. Both of them need to go through their own stage of decision here. And then there needs to be a grand gesture. If one of the characters messed up, then they need to have the biggest grand gesture, and they need to really make up to that person. But both characters need to give something to the other before they can be together. They need to sacrifice something, they need to give something, they need to offer something that is really poignant and moving and connected to the conflict, and showing that whatever their story goal or their character goal was at the beginning, that they are willing to be who and what they need to be with that other person. And then they need to have their the confession of love. Even if they've talked about their feelings before, this needs to be the moment where they commit to each other. And they let them know how much they feel, and apologies would happen at this point as necessary. So after you have this big, happy moment where everything is fixed, you need to give the readers a glimpse into the future. It can be the last chapter, if the last chapter, brings you down to like a moment where they are committed and are going to be together. but readers usually want more than that, and that is best done in an epilogue, I feel. I like to tie off loose threads in an epilogue, but mostly you want the epilogue to show where they are down the road into the future. And it's easy to be really cliche here, but make it meaningful, make it matter. It can be going on a date, it can be married, it can be having children, it can be a proposal scene. There's a lot of things that readers really like it to be. Just make sure that whatever it is, that you're keeping it fresh, making it dynamic, and making it matter, and the readers won't care. So before I go, I was going to try and show you something else. I write in Scrivener, and I was going to show you kind of how I set it up into 3 acts. So I always have Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. As you see, as I write in Scrivener, I actually use icons to do, I use the different icons to show whether it is the male point of view or the female point of view. And that helps me to keep track. I like to keep it like going back and forth in some of my series, but you don't have to be as rigid or mechanical with that as I do. But mostly it just helps me keep track of who's doing what where. But as you see, the Act 1 is really, really short. It's just a few chapters. This is where we have our introductions, we have our meet cute, and our inciting incident. And we set the stage for what's going to keep them together, what's going to pull, make them stick with the Velcro propinquity thing. Act 2 is the longest act of the story because it's where all those other beats are happening. All of the step forward, step back beats are happening in Act 2 all the way to the black moment. And Act 3 is where they pull themselves together and decide how to fix everything and then have their happily ever after. So I was going to show you when you have one point of view character, you can do a similar setup, where you have the same, see I have all the same point of view chapters, but it's still divided into acts. I hope that this tutorial was helpful to you in some way, and there's probably a lot more questions that I've not answered, but I tried to give you the basic blocks that you need to have to plan your romance ahead of time and get it going in the right direction. So we'll look forward to having more videos, and in the meantime, get those stories planned.